Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast. My name is Steve Smith, and I'm your host. And this is part 2 of Aussie Golf History Killara Golf Club. Now, part 2 continues as an interactive podcast episode. I have a few other guests joining me on the podcast, and with them comes a unique personal insight, not only into the modern history of Killara Golf Club now, but also the inner workings of the club and how they moved through their recent history. Now, don't forget, following the end of this podcast, if you want to understand a little bit more how I got to a lot of this information, I've had a great deal of help from a number of people, and I have to give thanks to those people that have helped bring this podcast and help me put this podcast together. So that will be at the conclusion of this podcast episode. So if you want to hear some of the details, and I've got to thank a few people because it's I can't do this without their help. So that's at the end of the podcast episode. Now let's go and continue on with part 2, the final part of the history of Killara Golf Club. This is episode number 94. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We pick up the Killara Golf Club story in August 1932. And the clubhouse had been engulfed by fire that levelled the building. Along with the building, the fire took most of the club's history with it. So we're at a turning point for the golf club. Now, the club was under the presidency of William Percy Maschwitz since 1929. At this point, he had been a member of the club for nearly 30 years and was highly involved alongside Edwards for many years. Maschwitz first joined in 1904 and lived on Buckingham Road, right next to the golf course. He had been around a long time and knew the club well. The club was in good hands. Now, it was a pretty interesting dark time, but Lorraine, the archives have something interesting from this.
Well, for the golfers, it appears to have been business as usual and optimism abounds. I have a wonderful photograph. The clubhouse is in the background, 2 chimneys, burnt timber everywhere, damaged gardens, and there's a gentleman teeing off on the first tee the morning after the fire. How good is that?
Nothing like a true golfer. The fire took everything, as you can imagine. And as I've said, trophies, treasures, artworks, everyone's belongings from inside their lockers. That's a lot of stuff there alone and was clearly upsetting to a lot of members. But the club assured members that along with the clubhouse building, members' belongings too were insured. The insurance claim would have been significant, I've got no doubt. And there's actually one story of a bloke that tried to claim the loss of his wife's fur coat that he claimed was inside his locker. As you do. I'm going to go with that he wanted 2 fur coats, or she did. Either or. Taking a Swiftie on that one. Maschwitz and his fellow board members quickly got to work organising, probably as quickly as the bloke playing golf, I'm going to be honest. Quickly got to work organising temporary measures for the club whilst they worked through the details of what next. Marquees were set up and temporary accommodation along with a temporary clubhouse. Sifting through the ashes of the clubhouse in the cleanup, looking for anything salvageable as the ruins of the building were being cleared, only 2 items of note were discovered. One was a large Hardy Brothers clock that today adorns the wall of the billiard room in the clubhouse, and the other, an item that could be seen as a shining light through all that was lost. You wouldn't believe this, but it was the silver centrepiece of Charles Danvers' Culworth shield. Yes, the wooden shield itself had been burnt in the fire, but somehow, some way, the silver centrepiece had survived. Now, not even 4 weeks had passed when on 30th of August 1932 it was reported that the membership voted on the location for where the new clubhouse would be built. No wasting time here. It was a decision between the location of the one that had just burnt down or a new site down along Fiddens Wharf Road around the side of the current 17th hole. The vote was a resounding 184 to 69 to rebuild on the same site as the previous clubhouse, with some of the main reasons relating to the views across the golf course and beyond from such a high location and its proximity to Killara Railway Station. And we've heard about the views, and that is one of the magnificent parts of being up here in this clubhouse. And like I said, we're recording here as well, which is beautiful. Now that a site had been decided upon, the new clubhouse building design was the next point of order. The club swiftly organised a competition for the design, which was to be between 8 architects, all of whom were members of the club, thank you very much. By the end of November, it was announced that Colin Brewster had won the design competition, and his design is what makes up the main part of the clubhouse that still stands today. We find in June 1933 that the club had approached Fairfax and Roberts jewellers and had asked them to provide quotes to replace some of the lost items from the clubhouse fire. Essentially, remake new ones of those lost items. This included remounting the Culworth Shield centrepiece onto a new shield. We know this because the club still has the quotes and receipts of his work. And how cool is that the club was able to have the Culworth Shield remade by the very same jewellers that made it in the first place back in 1901 using the original centrepiece. I'm going to ask you, Lorraine, it's a pretty special thing to have here at the club, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is now in use for the annual match between the men and women on Founders' Day, played in September each year. And we only played for it on the 7th of September, the 125th anniversary of the start of this club.
Fantastic. That's absolutely magic. I love that. I love it. Now, over a year had passed since the clubhouse fire, and on the 30th of September 1933, in the shadow of the nearly completed new clubhouse, the club held an event called the Champion of Champions. Now, you guessed it, a list of the best golfers pitted themselves against each other and the Kalara Lynx. And after 2 rounds, one in the morning and another after lunch, the one and only Jim Ferrier would come out on top. After a poor showing first round of 75, it was reported that some intense practice was completed by Jim during his lunch break, and he followed up with a blistering new course record of 66 to win the event by 7 strokes. Now, how's that for a turnaround at lunch? I'm going to go and practice. He was one of a kind, Jim Ferrier. November the 25th would see the official opening of the new clubhouse. The clubhouse design was rather substantial and was described as having commodious lounge and dining rooms, swimming baths, a lounge for ladies, secretaries and committees' rooms, and accommodation rooms for the residential staff. There was also the customary smoking room, which I love to hear in these wonderful old buildings. Now, it's a 2-storey building with 2 verandas offering spectacular views of the golf course and mountains beyond. They took advantage of retaining this site, which is fantastic. During the opening of the clubhouse, it was reported that at one point, the younger set associates took the limelight when discussing plans for their dance that was to be held in the following week in an article written as follows, and I'll quote it. The sacred Saturday afternoon masculine sanctity of the Kalara Golf Club was violated when the new clubhouse was formally declared open on Saturday afternoon by Sir Henry Braddon for the feminine invasion of members' wives and associates completely swamped the available accommodation and guests spilled as far as the 19th, more formally known as the Lounge Bar. And in what I found is a very unusual yet interesting piece of information, the following week at the Younger Set Ball held in the clubhouse, with some 300 guests in attendance, the Peters Ice Cream Company had made, for the ball, now we all know who Peters Ice Cream is, they did something special. They went out of their way. They made an ice cream model of the new clubhouse building. Now, you have to see this image, and Lorraine's going to have this. I found this one, and I couldn't stop. I was laughing in a sense, but it's pretty impressive what they did. So you've got to see this image to believe it, and I'll get with it, and I'll put it on my social media accounts as well. It's pretty cool. Now, I don't know how you do this stuff, but Peters Ice Cream were keen to get involved with the club, and they managed to do it pretty well back in 1933. 1934 would see the women's interclub matches begin for the first time between Kalara and New South Wales Golf Club. Incidentally, this year in 2024, they are playing the 90th anniversary matches. That's a long time, Lorraine, for some interclub matches, certainly between women's golf as well.
It certainly is, and when you consider they had to go from Kalara to La Perouse, with difficult travelling, and I think the tram might have gone some way towards La Perouse, they were dedicated, and it was all sensational. We played that 90th match, and it was a very, very lovely time. A social occasion as much as a golf occasion.
Unbelievable. And thankfully now they had the Harbour Bridge to cross, which made life a lot easier. Now, December 1934 would see the first annual Children's Christmas Party held. Now, this fixture would go on to become a popular event for members and their families and is still held today. Is that right, Lorraine?
Absolutely. And grandparents abound as they bring their grandchildren for the entertainment, Father Christmas, and the very sweet morning tea that they then have.
Fantastic stuff. The social scene is moving well within Killara Golf Club. Now, the Junior Members' Cup and Championship was held for the first time in 1935 for the best 36-hole stroke score and continues to be competed for to this day. There's lots of things coming out of the back of the fire. The club were really looking for improving, getting everyone back, knowing what they could do, and they were really rebuilding the club in such a fantastic way. 1936 would see a couple more course mods done with the removal of the par 3 Spion Cop as holes 15 and 16 were combined, and in its place would be a par 3 17th hole, similar to what is there today at that particular location. 1936 would see the club bestow William Maschwitz himself life membership of the club. Maschwitz was only the third person at this time to be honoured as a life member of the golf club in 1936. A couple of years had passed before the members wanted more space in the clubhouse, and it was in 1937 that construction began on the clubhouse to add 2 squash courts, a billiards room, card room and pro shop, along with an additional bar and enclosing the upstairs veranda. So they needed more space, more people were coming. Like I said, the club was rebuilding very, very well. All was completed and opened on the 15th of October 1938 with a cocktail party. It was in this same year that Killara Golf Club became a founding member of the Squash Rackets Association of New South Wales. We'll just add another string to the bow, Lorraine. This is fantastic. It's 1938, and at the age of 68, we see William Maschwitz pass away. And he'd not long, you just heard, been awarded life membership at the club. A member of Killara Golf Club since 1904, serving 30 years on the club's management committee, 7 years of which was as president. Now, like many of those before him, Maschwitz was another key figure and driving force of the club during its history. We move to the 3rd of September 1939 and Sir Robert Menzies announced Australia's involvement in the Second World War, and things were beginning to change yet again. By then, at the end of 1939, former Prime Minister Billy Hughes started a campaign to interest all sections of the community in the seriousness of the situation, and as a result, Lieutenant Colonel C.E. Cameron, the commanding officer of the 18th Battalion, which was known as the Ku-ring-gai Regiment, came to the club one night accompanied by some of his officers and gave a talk to members on his impressions of the situation. Following his talk, several members of the club enlisted in the 18th Battalion. And again, we see this support that the club weren't just thinking about the club. This was a bigger thing. This was thinking about the country and the world. There's lots of people that would sign up for things like this in the war, and it takes a lot to sign up, I've got no doubt. 1939 also saw Bradfield Park, a large open space of the Bradfield suburb, just down past the golf course, as we mentioned, acquired by the Commonwealth Government for the war. By 1940, the government had built the largest training camp in Australia for the Royal Australian Air Force, and from 1941, the facility was also used for the Women's Auxiliary Australian Air Force. Now, this facility was rather significant in size and had capacity to train 1,000 recruits. It would be known as RAF Station Bradfield Park, and ultimately some 200,000 recruits received training through this facility, which, as I mentioned, was just down the road from the golf course.
So what we know about Bradfield Park and the war effort for the Killara Golf Club came first from Molly Hodgkinson. She was a RAF driver. She recalls picking the mending up from the KGC and taking it to Bradfield Park and then the reverse. Her first experience, in fact, of the Killara Golf Club. How lucky were we that she subsequently joined the club. Another well-known associate member served at Bletchley Park in the UK and was subsequently engaged in missions in Europe. I only heard that last week. Another very brave member of the KGC. The very important part of the story is the work done by the Killara Golf Club to support all of those stationed at the Bradfield Park and also some of those who were in service, raising money. The War Workers Committee was sending Christmas canteen orders to the value of 10 shillings for each employee and caddy on active service. So we weren't just supporting the members who were at war, we were supporting everybody. The RAF base trained airmen before sending them to Canada and then on to Britain. I know because my father went to Bradfield Park and then on to Canada.
Wow, that's quite incredible. It was an incredible time for
one of many.
Incredible time for the country, let alone the membership of Kalara, as we're hearing. In 1940, the first dam storage water facility was built on the golf course, located at what is the lowest part of the home paddock on what was then the 9th hole and is today the 8th hole. It was only a small dam whereby the upper reaches of Honeysuckle Creek, which runs through the home paddock, would be dammed to store water behind it. Now, as the war continued and many younger members of the club joined the armed forces, the club decided from a financial perspective that certain golf events must be curtailed, and a request came from the Suburban District Golf Association that for the duration of the war, the purchase money for trophies for club competitions be paid into Commonwealth Government funds as a free gift. This request was generally adopted by the club. The club also established a Kalara Golf Club Patriotic and Kindred Purposes Fund, where monies collected from members would be paid by the committee to worthwhile war charities. Again, the support for the war effort. The associates of the club, always there side by side with the men heavily involved in anything to do supporting the club and the war, made countless garments and clothing that would be sent to the men in service. On October the 8th, 1942, a letter was received by the club from the Minister of Health designating the Kalara Golf Clubhouse as an emergency hospital for the war. Now, I've got no doubt the club was chosen due to its proximity to the RAF station, Bradfield Park. Now, although the clubhouse was never used for hospital requirements, the designation as an emergency hospital would not be repealed for another 3 years. So that's pretty interesting, Lorraine, that at the drop of a hat, and in the war effort, and we've heard all the support, that the clubhouse could have just been resumed for the hospital. I mean,
it could have, yes.
At any time. And no doubt the club would have supported that just the same in the way that they supported the war effort in so many ways. March 1943, it was noted that nearly 100 club members were serving with the armed forces. World War II ended in September 1945, and service members began returning to the club over the following years. 1947 saw golf returning back to pre-war numbers, and it wasn't long before the club saw the need for an investment into the club's facilities again. By 1948, the club had built their first bowling green, but there was a social side of things that was recurring and coming back, wasn't there, Lorraine, to the club?
There was. The season appears to be, from the number of programs we have from the post-war era, that they were dinner dances. There was the occasional film night. New Year's Eve was sold out very quickly, but mainly the season was May through to about the end of September. And you had to book, and there was a dinner dance one night. The dance was 7 and 6, and the dinner was 2 and 6. So I guess the 7 and 6 was to fund the band. And these were very well supported. And one of the other events that was a social event for the club was the end of season party barbecue down at the Bowls Pavilion. Casual and a lot of fun. Also booked out and heavily supported.
Very good. In 1948, Kalara Golf Club presented a perpetual cup that the Newcastle v Kalara matches would be played for and would be known as the A.A. Rankin Cup. Now, you guessed it, named after Archibald Aloysius Rankin. Now, by now, Rankin had served Newcastle as captain from 1906 to 1920 and president from 1921 to 1947. What James Edwards was to Kalara Golf Club, Archibald Rankin was to Newcastle Golf Club. That's the scale of what we're talking here. In 1950, Norman von Nider, known as the Von, I'm pretty sure, so I think that's colloquially how he's known, approached the club with the suggestion that he be appointed playing professional of the club. Playing many tournaments overseas, he was seldom seen at the club. However, the club garnered much interest from this arrangement, which was in place for 12 months. 1951, and with failing health, in particular his eyesight, we see the institution that was Walter Clark, who had joined the club back in 1922, retire as a professional of the club after 30-odd years being engaged here. Now, the club was quick to engage a replacement in the form of Jimmy McInnes, who had been working in Queensland at Southport and then Coolangatta Tweed golf clubs. Soon after McInnes's appointment, he employed an assistant in David Mercer. Only lasting until 1952, McInnes would resign from Kalara and take up the role of professional at Royal Sydney Golf Club. McInnes would also take his assistant Mercer over with him to Royal Sydney. Now, David Mercer had left an indelible mark on the membership of Killara Golf Club during his short stint before moving over to Royal Sydney with McGuinness. The club never quite detached from him. And in 1953, at the age of 23, Mercer had completed his professional qualifications, and Killara were quick to offer him the role as professional at the club, which he accepted. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as we move along in the Killara Golf Club history, I thought it pertinent that we get someone who's been a member of the golf club for quite some time. And on the microphone, we've had join us here the wonderful Louise Lane. G'day, Louise. How are you?
Morning, Steve. Well, thank you.
Thank you for taking the time out to come out here and do something a little bit different. It's like probably as close as we'll get to being on radio. I don't think I've even done it.
Very close.
But that's okay. Now, Louise, let's talk a little bit about your history here as a long-time journey as part of Killara Golf Club. You mentioned to me that you've been a member here for a very long time, and probably, I would say, one of the longest serving members currently still going at the club. How long have you been a member here for?
Yes, I've been a member for 72 years.
72 years. That's staggering. What a great time and a great journey to be involved with the club.
It goes quickly.
You've no doubt seen a lot of things. You've grown up, your family home growing up, you were born here. You grew up along the 18th fairway, is that right?
On the 18th tee, yes.
The 18th tee. That family home was built by your father, is that correct?
Yes.
And you're now living in it?
Yes.
And that's still in the family? That's quite incredible.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Quite incredible in itself. In that time, you would have seen, no doubt, lots of changes in the course and lots of changes in golf, society, all sorts of things in that time frame. Take us back a little bit, if you can, to your earliest time and your earliest memories of, I guess, being in and around the golf course, growing up at the golf club. We've just been talking about the wartime, and I know in World War II, and we had Bradfield Park and was being taken over and was a training ground. As a kid, you were saying, I think to me off before we've recorded this, about you remember soldiers being around and things like that locally.
Yes, the men used to practice marching up and down Fiddens Wharf Road.
Yeah, right.
Not every day, but it was great fun to watch them.
As a kid watching. So this was, I suppose, a busy kind of part of the world for a different reason, right? With the training ground around.
Yes. It brought a lot more people.
Things that we wouldn't normally see. I can't really imagine that, to be honest. So quite incredible. They're seeing soldiers walking around the golf course. And how did you get into golf? How did that work? Was it from a young age as well?
Oh, well, my grandparents played golf and my parents played golf here.
Yep.
And I just thought, I think I'd like to play too.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And was that, I've got to ask the question, was it something different back then for really young people to get involved in the sport? I don't know.
Yes, because it wasn't at school.
Right, that's a good point.
Yes, and you had to pay for it, but I just loved it.
Did you walk out the back? I grew up on the back of a golf course up in the Blue Mountains. Did you do that? Did you walk out the back fence and just go and start hitting a few balls?
Yeah. Just down over the creek and there we go.
The creek, that's right. And you were saying, because there was an old creek that's not here today, that's on this home paddock.
It's still under the ground.
Okay, so it's still there, but
it's
underneath.
It's still a creek,
yes,
okay. But you can't see it.
But you used to get out there and jump across the creek and go and hit a few balls around.
That's right.
And you were here during that time of Walter Clark, when he was a professional at the club.
Yes, well, he taught me.
He taught you?
Yes.
Taught you how to play the game?
Yes.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
There's a famous name in golf in Sydney.
Yes, he was a very gentle and knowledgeable man. It's very good.
I'm sure that would have been really nice to be part of, even fondly looking back at that time as a kid playing golf and learning that sort of stuff around here.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about how some of the things that your family was involved with Walter Clark, and then in time David Mercer. And David will become professional at the golf club. What can you tell us a little bit about what your memories are of that time?
Well, Dad and David had a very close relationship. Dad used to help David with some of the mending of the clubs. And
oh, really?
Dad made some of the honour boards in the clubhouse.
Wow.
And they used to have golf every afternoon, Monday to Friday, between 2 and 3 o'clock. Very enjoyable for them.
That's sensational. And you've won some things here playing golf with your mother. You've won some events here.
My mother and I won the mother and daughter a couple of times, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And was your mother a good player?
Average. She got very cross with me when I didn't hit the ball in the right place.
That's the reason why I don't play so much with my father. I'm stern enough on myself when I play golf. I don't need my parents being the same. That's interesting. And a lot of, I remember you were saying to me earlier, a lot of memories about thinking about the evolution of the golf course, and you remember seeing staff. You were talking about walking around with hand tools. As a former superintendent of a golf course, I think about our equipment, driving around, doing things. You were saying that they used to walk around, obviously, with...
Well, they had to carry their brooms and rakes and spades.
That sounds so bizarre to me.
No little carts.
No little carts. It was a different time back then, obviously, in terms of how, I suppose, the presentation and maintenance of the golf course has changed over the years.
It was different. It wasn't quite so immaculate, I suppose, but it was everything was done.
Yep.
But it probably took all day.
There's a bit of a thing that I remember you were suggesting about how the ground staff and also some of the members, and I think your father was involved in trying to manage some of the paspalum weeds around the golf course. Well, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the club asked the members to come out on a Sunday and gave them a bucket of salt, and they had to put the salt in the middle of the paspalum. I only remember it on the first fairway, but it was quite hilarious.
That's sort of a really, I suppose,
it's a hands-on job.
It's a hands-on job and a very organic method. No chemicals in use, just salt. Louise, thank you so much for joining in and telling us a little bit about your time being local and living so close to Killara Golf Club.
Thank you, Steve.
Now, in 1954, the club was again looking into the future of the golf course, knowing that they had a course that, for the most part, was small relative to the total land that they had at their disposal. The club approached a lead amateur golfer and prominent New South Wales golf course architect, Prosper Ellis, with the task of preparing a plan with suggestions to improve the golf course. Now, Ellis's plan was received, but the plans were shelved the following year. It was, however, decided by the committee at the time that the sale of a portion of the land of Foy's Paddock, namely the area immediately either side of Honeysuckle Creek, which is the southern end of Foy's Paddock, must be used to fund any course improvements thereafter. Now, December 1954 saw some alterations completed to the clubhouse with the opening of a lower lounge bar designed by the club's architect and still club member Colin Brewster. Due to the extra work required and at times difficulty in maintaining the short course, in 1955 we said that the club would close down the short course permanently. And that was a decision obviously not taken lightly, but something that the club felt that they could no longer continue to maintain. 1960 was a big year for the club's sporting facilities. Construction commenced on the second bowling green on the back of increasing popularity of bowls, and Colin Brewster, the club's architect, was again putting pencil to paper for Killara Golf Club, but this time in the form of a bowling pavilion. Now, on the 4th of October 1960, a small group of 5 leading grade golfers of the club put together a plan of their ideas of an improved golf course design. Clearly, Ellis's plan was not only shelved, but I'm going to say was thrown out at this point. Now, that said, in my opinion, it's quite likely that some elements of Ellis's plan were used by these members in their plan that was put forward. And by the beginning of 1961, the club had approved the members' proposed plan of the course redesign. It was at this time that Killara approached an internationally recognised golf course architect in Commander John Harris. Now, Harris had just the previous year been engaged by the Royal Canberra Golf Club to complete the design of their new Westbourne Woods course in the nation's capital. And it would seem, a little like back in 1926, as had been done somewhat with Alistair Mackenzie in keeping costs down and piggybacking off other clubs, that Killara this time would piggyback off Royal Canberra, who had already spent the big bucks to get Harris out here to Australia. Killara had paid over just over one-third the cost of what Royal Canberra paid to engage him on the back of Harris already being in the country. Now, what the club was looking for from Harris was to effectively rubber stamp their members' plan, but he would also provide his own detailed design sketches of the 18 green sites, along with some other minor alterations to the course. Now, the club still has Harris's original sketches, Lorraine, and they're significant and sensational to look at. I can vouch for it. They're fantastic.
Yep.
Little colour.
They are indeed.
Brilliant. Something that we need to, I think we need to show a little bit more of to the membership, maybe.
I think so.
All was approved by the club in September of 1961, and it wasn't long before work commenced on the course. By 1964, the club had sold the land on Foy's Paddock that was known as the Glen Eagles subdivision, and this would be a major windfall for the club that would ultimately pay for all the course construction works, including a sizable amount left over. Now, some of the largest earthworks completed as part of the new design were done on the first fairway here at Killara, where some 30,000 cubic metres of soil was moved to level out the steep right-to-left slope of the first fairway. Other major changes to the course included changing the first hole from an essentially straight downhill par 4 to the long sweeping right par 5 we have today. And over on Foy's Paddock, the 2 par 3s were removed, and this paddock would only now have 4 holes from this point on. The new course layout and subsequent works, including new bunkers and drainage, finally opened for play in 1965. This was also a time when the club appointed a committee to investigate water security for the golf course. The original dam, built for water supply in 1940 on the 8th hole, was proving inadequate, and a proposal was put forward for a full course irrigation system of some 400 sprinkler points throughout the golf course. Now, a solution was needed if Killara was to upgrade the quality of their golf course, and so they were trying to work out just how that was going to happen. Now, the solution put forward consisted of a new dam built in the same location of the existing one. However, it was significantly larger. By the time it came to putting a price on the works required for the new dam and irrigation system, it was nearly as much as the course redesign and construction that had been completed only a couple of years earlier. On September 25, 1967, the new irrigation system was commissioned and put to work. Now, this was a game changer for Killara Golf Club. A tree planting scheme was introduced in 1967, mainly to repopulate the somewhat bare Bradfield Paddock. When the club first purchased the land in 1903, they went about clearing it of trees and shrubs for the golf course, and it remained more or less bare, treeless, until this particular planting scheme. Led by club member Professor David Ferguson, the idea was for every 3 plants planted, at least one would survive. That was the hope. Now, if too many were to survive overall, they could be removed and sold as firewood. Makes sense from where I sit. Well, 4,000 to 5,000 trees of over 200 different varieties were planted over the following couple of years, and ultimately nearly all of them survived. They nearly planted a forest. Now, by the time the trees were old enough to cut down for firewood, the Ku-ring-gai Tree Preservation Order had come into effect in the council area, and all trees now had to stay. Now, this is why Killara was often seen as a bit of an arboretum of sorts for many years to come. And I remember playing here when I was younger. I had a chance to play, Lorraine. I'm just telling you this off the cuff. And I used to love it because I was into greenkeeping and started and knew horticulture. You had the little nameplates on a lot of the trees around. It was fantastic. And it was interesting and fascinating to look at, but it was overdone. It had been overcooked because everything managed to survive. That set themselves up for a different style of golf course that would come.
Well, they had no choice. They couldn't do anything about it for so long.
Unbelievable. In 1973, Bill Hopkinson became the golf course superintendent at Killara, having come from the one and only the Australian Golf Club here in Sydney. So Killara were moving forward, getting the right people involved, certainly on the golf course as well, which is sensational. Now, we get to a point in the story of Killara, we're in the 70s, and I have joining me here on the microphone is professional at Killara Golf Club, Greg Honan. G'day, Greg, how are you?
Hi, how are you, Steve?
I'm good, thank you, mate. Thanks for joining us. So you come in at a pretty important point in the story of Killara Golf Club. You're the resident professional here at the club now and have been for quite some time, and I'll go through that with you.
Yep.
I want to start, if we can you tell us a little bit about how you got into Killara Golf Club, where you started, and how that started for yourself?
Okay, look, I started when I was age 12. I started to play a little bit of golf through my parents, and I met Dave through his son Richard. And Richard said one day, would you like to come and have a game at Killara? And I said I would love to. And of course I met Dave.
David Mercer?
Yes, David Mercer. And Dave said to me, basically, I had a game of golf with him, had a game of golf with Richard, and he said to me, look, you're very interested in golf. And I said, yes, I am. Would it be possible to come and caddy for you? And
right.
He said, yes, I'd love you to come and caddy. So I got the opportunity to caddy for him in a few Pro-Ams. and a couple of big tournaments.
Okay.
And from that, my golf led on to the situation where when I was 15, he said, look, obviously you're playing really well. Would you like to become an assistant pro? And I said, yes, I would. And he said, well, if you get your handicap down to 3, I was playing at Longreef at the time. And he said, we'll look at taking you on. And I was able to get my handicap almost to scratch.
Wow.
And he said, okay, you're ready.
You're in.
Okay, you're in.
That's pretty impressive. Now, David Mercer is an entrenched name in Killara Golf Club. Some might say he probably, from a professional's perspective, before your time, he was Killara Golf Club in a sense. A lot of people far and wide in Sydney knew of him.
Yes.
He was a well-known teaching professional. Can you tell us a little bit about David, his time here, and your time working with him? And there's a bit of a story I know you've got where you in that caddying process when you're a younger bloke.
Look, obviously Dave basically was a fantastic player in his own right. He started at Killara in the early 50s, and of course when I started with him it was 20 years later, but he was a fantastic man. He was a person who always made you feel welcome. But obviously I had the opportunity, as I said, when I was age 12 to caddy for him a little bit. I caddied for him in one tournament at the Lakes. It was a big tournament.
Yep.
And obviously being a 12-year-old, and he was leading the tournament going through 9 holes of the first round. Name up on the leaderboard, so obviously I'm feeling pretty good.
I was going to say, as a caddy, you're feeling pretty chuffed, right?
Exactly, and we came to the 11th hole. Here I'm saying we came to the 11th hole. He was the player, of course, I'm the caddy. But anyway, on the 11th hole, he had about 100 yards into the green, under the old scaled yards.
Yep.
And he said, what do you think? It was into a bit of breeze. And I said, look, I like a little 9-iron. And he said, look, no, I think it's a wedge. And I
Hey,
said,
you're a
look,
12-year-old here. I'm just as long as I'm getting this right.
it was very true. And I said, look, you go with what you think, Dave. And he said, no, we'll go with the little 9-iron. I know there's a little breeze there. And unfortunately, he shanked it in the water. So with that, I didn't feel very good at that time. Anyway, had to drop again, and he hit a wedge to a foot and made 6. And so I said to him, "Look, you go with what you think next time." He said, no, it had nothing to do with you. I played the shot. I made 6. Let's go on from here. And he went on and shot 5 under in the round, which was fantastic.
Fair dinkum. Wow, what a great story. As a 12-year-old, that's pretty impressive to be able to get out there and caddy and tell him what clubs to hit and what shots to hit. But execution, as he put it, that was all him.
That's right.
There you go. Very interesting. So, David, we know David had been here for a long time, but as a person, he had great relationship with the membership here. Teaching, lots of people around knew him for teaching. They were coming here and teaching. How long was David here for, and how did his time unfold, and then you unfold then with him?
Well, basically, Dave was the pro here for 42 years. He got the job here when he was 21, which is a rarity. But the club obviously knew when they saw Dave what they wanted, and he's just did a fantastic job. From there, like I basically, from my apprenticeship days, I worked for 3 years under him apprenticeship, and then I went out and played, but I used to come back and help him out when I wasn't playing. And then obviously from there, I got a lot into my teaching as well.
Yep.
But I think the biggest thing that I learnt from Dave in the early days was he had an incredible memory for names. And he said to me right from the word go, he said, when people walk into the shop, son, he said, look at the face, put a name to it and remember it. And from that, I became very good at it too. I don't mean that in a modest way, but he was the best I've ever seen at it.
Yeah, right.
But the smiling face, and he said, just remember one thing. He said, when people come here to play golf, they come here to enjoy themselves. They've had a busy week. Always smiling face. How are you, sir? How was your week? Go out and have a nice game of golf. And when they finish their game of golf, always ask them how they played. And the other thing that he always said to me, he said, when it's always important to play golf with the members. And go out and play golf with them, give them a few tips, and they will absolutely love playing with a professional. And he was the best at it I've ever seen. So
wow, it's that relationship. It's all about relationship building in a club like this, isn't it? And we hear a lot about the history of the golf club here, and it being an extension of families, an extension of family life. And here's David from the pro shop side of things, welcoming people in, making sure they're enjoying their time, and you've then taken those cues and the things that you've learned, and you're doing that still to this day. You're here now, mate. Between the two of you, tell me, I want you to tell everyone in the audience here, how long have the two of you been working as professionals at the golf club over the both careers?
Well, basically, I've been now here 51 years. He was here for 42. So 93 years as
That's
professionals. But Dave, of course, as you know, when he retired, he kept on here at the club and he kept teaching. So what he did, I took over, but he basically said, okay, I'll just teach, help you out in the shop when you need me, do some starting. So that was great. So everyone was still seeing him. So he carried on teaching really until I think his early 80s.
Wow.
Right? So that was fantastic.
Unbelievable. Now, mate, there's a little bit of history here with caddies. Tell me about, I've heard a little bit of stuff about caddies at the club here working. Tell us about that. What was that like? Were you here at that time? Were you younger days? How did that work?
Yes, in my early days, look, we probably still had about 7 or 8 caddies, but obviously there was more going back before me. But of course, that was prior to golf carts.
Okay.
And a lot of the members were fantastic, where a lot of these boys, they would caddy, and in caddying, they would do 2 bags in the day. But one of the great things that a lot of people don't know, there was 2 great players. Alan Murray was one of them, and Alan Murray won the German Open, I think, when he was 19.
Wow.
He was a caddy here. And I'm not sure about Roger, whether Roger actually caddied here at some stage, but Roger Davis, of course, was coached by Dave from a very young age.
Right.
And that's where the caddying side of it was fantastic. They learned a lot, and Dave taught them a lot as well, and told them how to go out there and look after these members. And a lot of these older members would look after these kids. You know, they'd buy them lunch halfway around, buy them something at the end, give them a little bit of money. And of course, it wasn't a lot of money in those days, but they learned a lot.
And a great way to get young people into the sport. Now, I often sidetrack here a little bit, but sometimes I wonder how we get young people into the game of golf if it's not through friends or family.
Yep.
This is a great way. They get a little bit of work on the side and but they're learning a lot too, right?
Oh, 100%. And I think, look, one of the great things is we do now in the pro shop now is there's some young kids who work for us who come in and clean clubs. There's sometimes, a situation where they've just got into a little bit of golf and they learn so much from that. And, again, meeting the members again, and it's something going forward. And this is where we've got some great junior programs where they're learning the basics now, and they mightn't be able to play too much, in their 20s because work starts, things like that.
Yep.
But, of course, through work, learning the basics now, and through the corporate world, there's a lot of golf competitions, and when I say competition, corporate days, where they've already started and they go into these corporate days and they know a lot about golf already.
Now, mate, you've been working here. You've mentioned you've been here yourself for 51?
Yep.
51 years. It's an incredibly long time. Great relationship with the club, great relationship with the members. You continue to build on that. What do you, having been here for a long time, how does that relationship feel? What's it been like to build that and continue that from someone like David now into your own? It's now yours. You've got the reins.
Well, I think the most important thing is that the membership here is second to none. They're just great people. They're people who are from all sort of different places in life where basically they treat you just like we treat them.
One of the things I've heard about is you've got a fantastic Pro-Am event here that you've started. Tell us about that, mate, please.
Okay, well, Dave being the icon of golf that he was, and look, when he was coming towards the end of obviously his career and that sort of thing, I always felt that we had to have a Pro-Am with his name to it.
Yeah, right.
And basically through 2 or 3 different people, but particularly Doug Thompson from Thompson Healthcare, who was a very close friend of Dave's and mine, I said, look, why don't we run a Pro-Am with Dave's name to it? And he said, what a great idea, let's start it. So it all started from there, and it started in a situation where it started with, we got it to 30,000, which is still a big one-day Pro-Am.
Yeah.
But it's grown into, over a period of time, into a $100,000 Pro-Am. And
wow.
I think one of the great things that you see from it is that the likes of Roger Davis, Ian Baker Finch, Peter Senior, all these guys who are good friends of mine, yes, but have known Dave so long, and they come and play for Dave Mercer.
Really? They're part of it?
They do. And they play for Kalara Golf Club, of course, but that's the whole history of Dave Mercer. They come and play for Dave.
That's incredible. What a great story and a great part to continue
Yep.
the Kalara as we move forward.
That's right.
And all these history pieces the club is taking and continuing. And like I said, mate, you're now part of the club's
Yep.
history in the time that you've been here, which is so good to see, mate. It's wonderful to hear these stories from the professional side. Sometimes we find that clubs not sure how those relationships work, but I go back to the things that I'm learning, talking and reading into the history and talking to people here is this connection. It's all about relationships with people. And one of the things that I'm learning is that as a group, as a collective, Kalara does that so well. And those relationships grow and they become deep relationships. You're friends with people for a long time and people let's go and come back to Kalara. It's just like home. Fantastic, Greg. Thank you so much for being involved.
Thank you very much, Steve.
Now, back to the Kalara Golf Club story. By 1978, there was a large group of weekend associates totalling around 60, which included playing inter-club matches. Lorraine, that was getting bigger, the associates. More and more people.
Yeah, it was. And we did have a very strong group, and they did play a number of inter-club matches. Very competitive.
In 1979, the club would add more members' sporting facilities with the construction of 2 loam tennis courts. Now, the club was really firing on all cylinders for the members at this time, offering many options of ways to enjoy time spent at the club. In 1985, the club held a special meeting for members where they were to vote on whether or not to allow the kikuyu grass to cover the fairways and take over from the existing but struggling couch grass fairways. Increasing shade from trees, increasing traffic from ever more golfers, along with the requirement to eradicate kikuyu where and when it appeared, was proving challenging for the course maintenance team. Now, this vote was significant in one particular fashion, as the women of the club were allowed to join the men and vote on equal ground on this subject. The club voted very much in favour of encouraging the kikuyu and allowing it to take over as the dominant grass species on the golf course. It's often said that this was a great decision by the club, and quality of the turf surfaces continued to improve as kikuyu became the more dominant playing surface. And the late 80s and early 90s would see the water supply becoming yet again an issue for the golf course, and in 1991 the club would again go down the road of enlarging the dam on the 8th hole for the 3rd time. Now, this time the capacity was doubled again by raising the dam wall some 2 metres, along with an upgrade of the irrigation pump system. By 1994, after continuous increasing stress on the fairways, all of the fairways had been oversown with cool season ryegrass, which could handle less direct sunlight as a result of the ever-growing trees on the golf course. So at this point, we've had the kikuyu taking over because the couch was struggling, but there's still more shade coming, and now the kikuyu was starting to struggle a little bit, so the club went down the path of oversowing with cool season ryegrass, which is interesting.
In 1995, we took a project to the board to run the Ladies Pro-Am at the Kalara Golf Club. We'd played in one at Roseville, women, amateurs, male professionals, and it was a very special day, a resounding success. We had the full cooperation of the Pro Shop, especially Greg Hone and David Mercer and the board. The plan was women amateurs playing with the male pros. The board supported us absolutely. The first event in 1996, whole sponsors, mainly from club members and Pro Shop supporters, funded the pro purse and the prizes for amateurs. Our members were very generous. It grew over more than 10 years to be a significant event in the New South Wales PGA calendar. We not only funded the professional purse, which was $8,000 in year one, but also a contribution to charity as well. We looked after the sponsors on Sponsors Day and the pros on the Pro-Am Day with excellent help from the KGC chef. Steve, I think sometimes the pros were very happy to get a really good feed when they finished their golf.
You've got to have a good feed.
And I have to say our bar bill on Sponsors Day, the club were very happy with. We won the New South Wales PGA Metropolitan Pro-Am for 2009, an unexpected recognition. We finally called a halt in 2010. We had great sponsors, great support from the club, from the professionals and the members. It was a very special time.
Very interesting to hear that from that event, Lorraine. That's fantastic. Now, we come to a point in the podcast, ladies and gentlemen, where I have with me to help talk about the timeline and how things have improved with Killara Golf Club as we go on. And I have now joining me Karen Wood, the Women's President of Killara Golf Club, who also is the Vice President of the club. Welcome along, Karen.
Thanks, Steve. Nice to be here.
This is really cool. We've talked about a lot of things in the history of the golf club getting to this point. It's been really fascinating and learning so much about it. I'd like to get a feel from within the golf club. You're on the board of the golf club. We've just mentioned that in your title. I'd like you to tell us a little bit, if you can, about it's not common. Let's just say it for what it is. It's not a commonplace thing to have a good women's representation on boards of golf clubs, on committees, helping to give direction to a golf club. Can you tell us a little bit about how that's come about and evolved, I suppose?
That's correct. Currently, we have 3 women on the board of 9, and I was also on the board back 10, 12 years ago when we had 2 women on the board. So it's always been the way that there have been women on the board. And that has happened organically. We don't have a quota system. We look at nominations for the board in terms of a skills matrix, and that's where it happens.
So based on merit?
Based on merit. Yep. It doesn't happen because I am the women's president either, which happens in some clubs, that automatically the women's president is on the board. So there we are. We're there because of what we considered to be able to offer the club. And
that is something that works. We see it now in good business. We see it in lots of good things around the country and indeed around the world, that you get a broader understanding and a better voice and opinion on where things are at, what the real lay of the land is, rather than guesswork.
Yes, and real skills that come from a broad range of careers leading up to those people being considered for the board.
Absolutely. Now, tell us a little bit about what you've sort of enjoyed most in your broad range of experiences here in the club.
When I first joined, I had very little children, and so I came, played golf, went home. And I had my first, the only person I've ever had golf lessons with is Greg Honan, so for 35 years probably. And then as I got more time, I got more involved in playing pennants golf at different levels, and then eventually into the grade team, and then involved in with a board position, and now the women's committee. And in amongst all of that were other various activities that we get involved in. You put your hand up to help.
Sure.
So,
sure.
That's the strength of the club.
Take us back a little bit, because there's a little bit of detail in getting those women being part of the board. How did that come about in the club?
Well, Lorraine Gray was the first female board member.
Yes.
And that was voted on and unanimously passed. It wasn't a point of contention, and that was just foresight on the part of those who were already on the board, who saw the need for that equality to come through.
Yeah, okay. That's good. Very good to hear. Very interesting. You've been part of the members, part of the women's pennants team, and we've talked about that in the history so far, the different divisions that Killara's climbed through the ranks to be on top in Sydney. What's it like being part of those teams and being part of this inter-club competition that's pretty strong here in Sydney, right? It is in a lot of capital cities, and here is no different.
It certainly is, and it's a great opportunity for all of us. We've got 6 different pennant teams for all sorts of handicap levels, and you get to play with a team, which in itself has its real bonuses, and you improve your golf playing away at other courses. You make friends at other courses. It really strengthens the whole bond. And then for some of us who want to, you can then work your hardest to try and get your handicap to a level where you can move up through into silver or into grade.
Yep.
And then represent the club that way. But it's all a great learning experience and a great bonding experience for the members.
I want to ask you the question about Lorraine Gray. Now, Lorraine has been part of this podcast. She's the archivist historian of the golf club. She's been around within the club for quite a lot. She's given a lot. She's seen a lot.
Yeah.
And in 2012, she was bestowed the honour of being a life member of the club.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty big deal.
It is a big deal. And while the wording is simple, long and meritorious service to the club, there's a lot involved in that. And she certainly ticked all the boxes for that. And we still, as you've seen in the making of this, we still refer to Lorraine or defer to Lorraine quite often in so many things. So when we went down to New South Wales for that interclub, Lorraine was invited. She spoke about the history of the clubs and the history of the event. It's vital. She's also in our foundation day has made speeches and written the speeches, and it's vital for us to remember all of that, because it's so easy to forget these little snippets, and a lot of them are very amusing, and you know, and you shake your head sometimes. But it's just wonderful having all of that resource, as well as Lorraine's guidance about protocol or those sorts of things that are important about when you're running a club of lots of different personalities.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think as we've learnt with this podcast, and we'll continue till we finish the story, but I think it's always good to, what's the line I like, and we've all heard it, you got to know where you want to go, you've got to know where you've come from, type thing, which is,
that's right.
And it's hard if you don't have that first-hand knowledge to pass on. If you're just guessing, it's very difficult to know those details, in fact. And we have someone like Lorraine, and the club's had them over the years and will continue to. That's why these things make such a difference. And to recognise that in life membership, I think,
yes,
would be.
And she was women's captain and women's president and on the board. So outside of the archives, there's a wealth of experience and knowledge there too.
Absolutely. Now, it is a golf club, so let's talk a little bit more about the golf and the membership in. You've got a wonderful individual here on the women's side of things who has an extra... you guys are telling me this fact, and I still struggle at the thought. Is it 10 years running as a champion?
10 years
consecutive running. 10 years. Tell us who it is and what's going on.
Jan Crichton, who, by any count, is remarkable. So when she joined the club, she changed a lot of the way we look at ourselves as golfers, I think.
Okay.
Now, there had been obviously wonderful golfers before, but it was Jan's work ethic and her approach and the way she shared herself around amongst all sorts of different golfers of different levels, and she led us from the front in terms of grade and pennants. And a few years before... we had a wonderful Japanese lady join the club for 3 years until she went back to Japan. But Yuki had played college golf in the States, so she was a different level altogether from the rest of us. And so she had shown us a certain... Well, we could aspire.
Yeah, sure.
And then Jan really took that on board and worked with Yuki quite closely. And then we all started to feel that actually maybe there is a new level that even we could go to.
Yep.
And so Jan's been a great inspiration for all of us.
There's something in seeing that, right?
Yes.
And experiencing and being shared that knowledge. And if you're, by the sounds of it, I don't know Jan obviously, but if she's coming through that personality where she's sharing that out, and like you said, she's playing with other people, and whether they're of different levels of golf, to be able to experience that as a new golfer. Yes. All that stuff makes a big difference when you can see it and you can be part of it, and you go, wow, look at this. And you feel accepted and you feel like there's no barriers or any of that sort of stuff, right?
Exactly right. And, of course, Jan works full-time.
Yeah, right. And she's 10 years running as champion? Are you serious?
I don't know what the rest of us are
becoming more remarkable the more details you tell me.
So she's just set a very high bar, and she's been a great, as I said, she's been a great inspiration to all of us.
Yeah,
and,
unbelievable.
Yeah.
What do you know exactly what her years are? 10 years from when to now?
Yeah. So last year was
10th.
Yeah, and she's about to step up again
staggering.
In October.
That's staggering. Mm-hmm. I still can't believe that. I don't care what club you're at. That's extraordinary.
It is. But
and from the men's perspective, you've got a 9-year champion over a period of time as well.
Simon Cooper. So he's also 10. And
10. Sorry.
And but his is stretched out over something like 4 decades.
Oh, which is talk about longevity of golf.
Which is a different kettle of fish altogether, isn't it? And
wow.
And so, and he's been living in the country for a little while now. But when he comes back, he's still the same swing, and you can pick it. We recently had an artwork done, and part of it had Simon's.
Yep.
Simon, in it.
Yep.
And you could just look at it, and everybody went, "Well, that's Simon Cooper."
And you knew. It's like a fingerprint, right? Your own posture and the way that you have your golf swing.
Jan Crichton's in that artwork too, and you just look at it and go, "Oh,
It's a remarkable piece of artwork, really, isn't it?
I've been following that swing around for a while.
Well, Karen, look, it's great to get a little bit of insight from the club's perspective. You being on the board, president, vice president of the club, I appreciate you letting us know a little bit about that, how that's gone on for the club, and how that's going to help direct the club into the future, and the way that things will move forward in the club, and also giving us an insight into some of these remarkable people that are involved with the club as well, and obviously yourself is part of that, but certainly from a golf perspective, what it's like being in Pennants and what it brings to the club members. I hope people who are listening to this get a little bit out of that are going to hear it and go, well, we get that here and we understand that. But also, not just from those within Killara, from your own club. Hearing that and seeing that is quite impressive. And I think anyone can take some stuff away from that as to how to be able to get that close-knit community involved in any club. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Now, we're in the late 90s. So in 1999, this is in the timeline, so you've got to try and keep up with us, people. We do our best, and there's a lot to cover. Now, in 1999, it was a centenary year for the Killara Golf Club. Huge celebrations were planned for this particular year, as you would expect. A big time, 100 years. I know we're doing 125 now, but 99 was a big celebration for the club to reach its centenary. Now, a lone pine was obtained from the Australian War Memorial, which was planted adjacent to the first tee. The lone pine is a memorial to all Killara Golf Club members and their families who have supported their country in the time of war. That was also a pretty significant inclusion at that time in the centenary as well, wasn't it, Lorraine?
Yes, it was.
By 1999, 13 of the 40, now get this, 13 of the 40 50-year members of the club, so more than a quarter of them, were women. Now, that's a big deal. That shows we've learnt so much about how much the women have been a part of this golf club. And when I saw that statistic, that at that time, the centenary of the club, a quarter of the members that have reached 50-year membership were women, that says a lot right there. I don't think we need to say much more, but that's very, very impressive indeed, and shows just how the club works well and is such a great community. In 2001, we would see the introduction of the Shirley Moyes mother-son and Earl Bastian father-daughter trophies. It's a new addition to the club. Now, by 2008 is when we would see Bill Hopkinson retire from the superintendent's position after an exceptional 32 years of service. Ryan Fury would begin his time at the club as superintendent from September of that year. Over the next 16 years, under Ryan's tenure as golf course superintendent, he would lead the course maintenance team on an incredible journey that would see the golf course reimagined and infrastructure completely overhauled, with a new maintenance facility and irrigation system, something golf clubs seldom have the opportunity to complete. I wanted to be able to bring that out through this story as to who's been looking after the grounds of the course, and we talked about Arthur Moe, we talked about Bill Hopkinson, and we talked about Ryan Fury. It's a great thing to be able to recognise who's been part of this journey, looking after the wonderful golf course that's here at Killara. We come to a point, again in the podcast, where I've got someone else joining me on the other end of the microphone here, helping me as we talk about the history of Killara Golf Club. And I'll introduce straight up, and that's life member Rod Reed. G'day, Rod. How are you, mate?
Really well, thanks.
Thank you for joining me on this and joining everyone that's been involved. This has been a great journey so far that we've talked about everything to do with Killara Golf Club. And your insight and your knowledge and your experience with the club is going to be no different, I'm sure. So I'd like to, start off if we can. You've mentioned that you're a life member of the club. You've clearly been here a long time, and no doubt, being a life member, you've been involved in a lot of levels at the club, deeply within the club, and like I said, you've been here for a number of years. Mate, can you tell us a little bit about the time when you first got involved with the club and how that might have come about?
Certainly, yeah. I, as a young lad, moved up from Melbourne in the mid-70s. I was a member of Peninsula Country Golf Club, as it was in those days, now known as Peninsula Kingswood. And I came up here. I had reciprocal membership rights at two other clubs in Sydney, and I looked around for a few months, played golf at both of them, and they were both pretty quiet clubs in those days. Yep. And I'd met a couple of guys from Killara and been lucky enough to be invited to come and have a game here on two or three occasions. So that was 1977, And pursuant to that, I thought, well, that's my sort of place.
Yep.
The place was alive and jumping, and I played somewhat unsuccessfully in the Saturday comp and made the decision then, if I was invited, I would join.
Yep.
I was invited, and I spent nearly 2 years on the waiting list, and was admitted in 1979. Back in those days, on a Saturday, there were drinks served in the locker room as you came in.
I think that's brilliant. I like that touch.
Yeah, it was called Dirk's Bar. Dirk used to clean your shoes, and if you wanted a little whiskey before you had your shower, or you wanted a cold gold KB before your shower, then Dirk was your man. You then went into the downstairs bar, and there was a lot of drinking, a lot of merriment. I was very conscious. I was in my mid-20s. I was very, very conscious of those who'd served during the war, even in the late 70s. It was quite an elderly membership, but there were a group of, I guess, us younger guys coming through, which is really part of what attracted me to coming here.
Yep.
Yeah, it was a different club, but to me, it was the most attractive club that I'd played in my short time in Sydney. I was looking for club life.
Yeah, very good. Very interesting, and a good insight into how you got in, but also that time. Like you mentioned, it was a different time for the club and a different time in society. Clubs often reflect society quite well. So it's interesting to hear those little details of a sneaky whiskey in the locker room. That's something I wish I had from time to time. I'll drop that one in. Mate, now, you've served on the board here and committee in some instances. Tell us a little bit about that and what you've performed and from a board perspective, how long you'd served.
It was suggested to me that I put my name forward to join the board in 2010. I did so with a group of fairly fresh faces, one of whom you've interviewed already today, Karen Wood. Karen was already on the board when I joined. I served on the board from 2010 initially. In 2012, I took over as chairman of grounds and continued in that role. As chairman of grounds, then vice president. Then I became president in 2016 through till 2019.
Yeah, right. Okay. And you joined the club, you mentioned there in the late 70s. You would have seen the golf course, and you mentioned you're on the Greens Committee and leading those sorts of places along with leading the club. You would have seen the golf course evolve and change and improve. As I know from a greenkeeping perspective, I can say that technology's improved, equipment's improved, expectations have changed a lot over those years in the 80s and 90s. That's a fact I can speak for. The club changed. It kept improving, along with a lot of the leading clubs in and around Sydney and certainly Australia. The club and the board were, I call it a progressive type of board. I don't see the club being followers. You were setting the lead of how you went about business. And this is what I like to hear. I can speak from what I'm seeing and hearing is that you were going about things and working out how to work towards the future. Whatever that future direction would be, you didn't follow the lead, follow the others. You did what you felt was best for you as a club. You got the right people involved in a club perspective. What was it like getting the right mix of people on the boards, and how did the club go about looking to improve the future direction of the golf course and the golf club?
Like a lot of clubs, over the years, people tend to have been invited to become directors or members of the committee, as they used to be known. And that can attract criticism. It quite often does. But at the end of the day, constructing a board that goes up for re-election every year is a difficult thing, because succession planning is difficult, particularly when key positions need to be taken into consideration, such as treasurer and captains and presidents. In my time, certainly, we decided that we would continue the practice of ensuring that women were properly represented. Women throughout Kallara's history, I think, have been properly represented, but we probably took it a little further during that decade, starting in 2010, to the point where women were represented on every committee. Wow. We felt that was important. And I think in terms of leadership of the club, people won't follow you if you're trying to lead them somewhere they don't want to go. And I think that the key thing that this club has done very well is communicate with its members and ask them about the direction they would like to take.
Yep.
What are your priorities? What sort of club do you see here in the future? What are we doing well? What are we not doing so well? And as a director, as a past director of the club, I think you were always very, very conscious, or I was certainly always very conscious, that you want to leave it in better shape than you found it. That's never to say that you found it in bad shape, but you have to continue to be relevant to your members. So in many ways, you're not building for the 50s, 60s and 70-year-olds that you are today.
Yep.
You're building for the generations that are coming, and you're asking the generations that are coming through, what is it that you are looking for? What do you need? We often hear and use the phrase in this club, a club for life. And having come from out of Sydney into Sydney, this club becomes somebody like My's life. It's where you make your friends. You're playing golf with them. It moves towards the centre of your social circle,
yep.
and you start to plan your time around it. And if you cease to be relevant to people in that way, if it simply becomes a place where they buy rounds of golf, then you're starting to compete with all sorts of other outside attractions that you really don't want to be competing with.
That's a pretty in-depth assessment, and I really appreciate you articulating it that way, because I don't think clubs look at it properly in that light often enough. And a self-assessment and awareness, but also you talked about succession planning, and I'm very interested in potentially understanding a little bit more that it's hard. How do you go about looking to improve and, like you said, leave a place better than when you first came on board? How do you go about that when you're not looking to leave it? It's not just about you. It's for people that aren't you anymore. It's for people, like you said, that can be really challenging, right?
Oh, it can be. Any decision you make is going to please some people and annoy others.
Yeah, sure.
That's the fact. But at the end of the day, you have to satisfy yourself that a decision you make today is still a good decision in 5 years or 10 years' time, or even after you're gone.
Yep.
These things linger, and you have periods in clubs' lives where there's great activity, there's great refurbishment, renewal, there are projects underway, and then you do have other periods when times don't permit that.
Yep.
And so you have periods of perhaps dormancy where you can fall behind. And that was always the test, I think, for the people I worked with in decision making. It's not whether it pleases you personally or pleases your age group or your cohort. It's, are we doing the right thing for the future of the place?
Interesting. And it probably leads me to the next part of talking about the rejuvenation, the redesign, the reimagining of the golf course and thinking about its future. You've done a major development on the golf course, a reimagining of the golf course. There's a lot to that. There's a lot to assessing what you want to do, which way you want to go. And, we talk about the golf course because I think that's a key understanding of any golf club is the golf course itself. You got someone in Harley Cruz as an architect involved. You had a direction from the club's perspective, which way you wanted to go. There's a lot to assess in that to get to the right place you want to go to. Let's talk about what is involved in that process and how did you come to someone like Harley Cruz?
It goes back again to talking to the members and understanding what members' needs are. Back in 2017, we had already done most of the irrigation work on the course, but when we did a major survey in 2017 and followed it up again a little bit later and talked to members about the course and how it was working for them, and there was a very widespread view that the old push-up greens, we knew from grounds activities that they were becoming very, very difficult to maintain, that the greens, the bunker complexes needed work. We didn't intentionally set out to redesign the course, but certainly the greens and bunker complexes were the start of our thinking, followed by the fact that, as you'd be aware from your researches back in the 60s when the tree planting occurred, we really overplanted the course with trees with a view to selecting the strong ones and taking the weak ones out. And society changed.
Yes,
and we weren't
rules
able
change and
we weren't able to take as many of the weak ones out as we would have liked. We had primarily old push-up greens, bunkers that the contouring had started to sag, so water, whenever it rained, water was running into them. It was in need of renovation, and so the starting point very much was tree removal, tree replanting and revegetation, and new greens and new bunker complexes. We experimented with grasses. All the time we were talking to members about their priorities. We were experimenting, I should have said. We created an experimental hole back in 2014 so we could work with grasses and try and work out what was best for this microclimate and this environment and this soil. But very much the decision to do the work on the course was made by the members themselves. It was the members' feedback that said, this is the top priority. If you're serious about spending money, then the top priority is the course. I think now, sure, there was controversy at the time and people for and people against, but I think now, if you look at the feedback that comes from members about their course, they're proud of it. We set out to have the best golf course on the North Shore, and I think we've managed to create that. We've created the sort of course that the club can be proud of and that will attract new members. In terms of the architect, how did we find Harley? I'm not sure whether we found Harley or Harley found us, but we put together a small subcommittee representative of younger people, women, board members. We put together a small subcommittee and we wrote a brief for what we wanted, the outcome we wanted as a golf course. What are we looking for in a redesigned golf course? And we had a discussion about who we would like to invite, and we ended up inviting 4 different architects to come and talk to us, one of whom was Harley. And we also created a matrix of what we were looking for from the architect. We thought the response we get's only going to be ever as good as the brief we give him, and then we should tell them how we're going to judge their responses. We did that, and I remember with great delight after the first round of interviews, when we sat and compared our written notes afterwards, despite the fact that, as you'd expect with a small subcommittee, everybody had arrived at the same view to that point, but in a different way, which I thought was really interesting. And from that point on, the recommendation to try and engage Harley was relatively straightforward. Harley impressed us greatly. Harley struck that very happy medium for a golf course architect of not only knowing and having a view on what he'd seen, but was certainly receptive to listening to members and to dealing with members and to taking on board member feedback. He'd indicated a willingness to do that as part of his prescription for turning what he was presenting to us on day one as his thoughts and ideas into a plan for the course 3 or 4 months later.
But I think about, you've talked about succession planning, we've talked about improving, we've talked about the history and how that the club has also got to here, and we're coming towards the back end of Kalara's history in this podcast episode. This is kind of setting yourselves up, am I not correct in saying, for the next 125 years? There's a lot that goes on, thinking about past you, thinking about past Lorraine, past the people that have been involved in the podcast. There's a lot of succession planning. Is the club, there's a lot of thinking past yourselves, isn't there? The club wants to be around for another 125 years, I take it.
Not only that. I mean, the club's been very successful in different eras. It's been a very, very successful place indeed. We need to make sure that its success doesn't stop when this generation moves through. We've been very lucky. We inherited a hell of a good golf course and a very, very good club. We chose to join here because it was a special place. We need to make sure that when our work is done, it's still a special place in the eyes of those who come afterwards. I mean, I remember never forget the great excitement. I think, as I say, I was 26 or 27 years old when I joined. The great excitement I had at being part of this place. It is special. And we need to make sure that it continues to be that way for the people that come in the future.
Yep.
That's the responsibility, if you like.
Yeah. Well said, mate. Thank you, Rod Reed, for your great insight and how the club is looking forward to the future, to the next, I'll say at 125 years. It's going to be a great journey to continue to follow from everyone outside looking in.
Steve, thanks for the opportunity to participate.
No worries.
It's been fun talking with you.
It's 2013 and David Mercer was bestowed life membership of the golf club after all of his years of service to the club as their resident professional. In 2014, a new full course irrigation system was installed, with one of the major improvements being water efficiency. Now, this sustainability angle of the project would see an estimated 40% reduction in water usage purely by improving efficiency of the new infrastructure and its delivery of water throughout the golf course. A really, really important thing as golf courses move forward is to be efficient use of water. Now, 2015, the Coldworth Shield was reintroduced as a perpetual on Founders Day, Lorraine, and that's, like we said, it was a fantastic addition and bringing it back. The Life members decided to fund an annual junior scholarship program, funding 5 junior golfers who were the children or grandchildren of members. Now, this pays for fees, tuition and certain other expenses with the goal of promoting Kalara's junior membership. And I believe you're involved with this, Lorraine.
Well, as one of the Life members, I'm happy to make the contribution each year.
Sensational. And as we heard with Rod, it's about bringing in the new generation as the club moves forward. So fostering that is really important.
And keeping them here as members of the club whenever we can.
Absolutely. On Saturday, the 12th of September, in 2020, so this is deep in COVID times, sadly, we see the passing of David Mercer, aged 89. His years working for the club, but might I say with the club and its members, was enormous. In my opinion, and from what we've heard throughout this podcast, if James Edwards was viewed as the father of Kalara Golf Club, then David Mercer would most certainly be the son of Kalara Golf Club, in my opinion. Now, his career, born at the club in 1951, spanning so many years, nurturing many generations of golfers and young professionals through the club, was nothing short of monumental, as you've heard Greg talk about. David is the most recent name of those past that will be remembered and talked about long into the club's history, like those that I've mentioned from over 100 years ago. In 2021, David Mercer was awarded the Order of Australia Medal posthumously for his significant service to the PGA of Australia and the Kalara Golf Club as head professional from 1952 to 1996. Now, as a final note regarding the golf course, the enormous 16-year chapter of Superintendent Ryan Fury has come to an end, making him one of the longest-serving superintendents in the club's history. And my research suggests possibly only the 6th person in 125 years to lead the team maintaining this wonderful site. Kalara Golf Club has now turned the page with the appointment of Mark Ward as golf course superintendent, and that will begin Mark's time here. We hope that will continue in such a long way as many people that have been involved with Kalara Golf Club. Now we come towards the end of the story of Kalara Golf Club here, and I think it fitting that as we come to the conclusion of the story and we've learnt about the redesign and the reimagining of the golf course, that it's only fitting that we bring in, on the other side of the microphone here, Harley Cruz, golf course architect from Cruz Golf. G'day, Harley. How are you?
G'day, Steve. I'm going well.
Mate, thank you for joining us here. There's a lot that we've gone through in learning about and understanding and hearing of Kalara Golf Club's history. And I think you're the final piece of the puzzle, mate, and I think it's pertinent that we hear from you about what you've left for the club here. I'd like to hear from you, and I'd like you to tell the audience what that evolution was like, and can you explain to us about what the club had here architecturally as a golf course and what you then brought in?
Yeah, good. Well, firstly, it was great to get appointed as the architect, and it was a great honour to get the job. And for me, living 15 to 20 minutes away, it was the first time since moving to Sydney in 2000 to have a project sort of in my own backyard virtually. And so, and I'd always heard about Kalara, but never played it. I'd seen it from the edges, driving through, but I'd never actually been in and played it. So the the brief really was a greens reconstruction program. The club had spent the money on a new irrigation system in the years prior, a new maintenance shed, and the next step in the sort of upgrade of facilities proposal was a greens reconstruction program. The first port of call there was to get out there and actually obviously get a good look at the place, walk the place, and start to do a review of the golf course and seeing what needed to be done. And fortunately too, the club had already got a DA in to do certain works on the golf course and around the clubhouse, and that also included the permission to remove way more trees than we ever actually removed during the construction of the reconstruction of the course. And when I came here, I don't think I'd seen a course as heavily wooded.
It was reforested,
as Killara.
Essentially.
I mean, you're literally sort of threading the needle down the middle of fairways to get. And it's incredibly narrow. So, and the other thing too is there was 19 holes, including some that were very tight.
So part of that was to assist in that process of making the golf course, I suppose, more accepting and more playable?
Yeah, well, I think the thing as an architect and to be asked to redo all the greens, the number one question to ask of any course are all the greens in the right position?
Yes.
Now, it's amazing how many clubs go in there, and it's the same with bunkers, naively just go and rebuild greens where they were, or rebuild bunkers where they were without actually asking that question, the fundamental question, are these greens in the right place? And what I said to the board here at Killara, and Rod Reed was the president at the time, I can't assume that all the greens are in the right place. And sure enough, when we start to ask the question of the golf holes and what was out there, basically saying we need to take a really good look at the structure of the golf course before we start spending money on rebuilding greens. So my observation commentary to the board is that we haven't got the room for 19 holes. We've almost got enough room for 18 in a comfortable, relaxed way. Let's not force it. So we basically took the old 11th hole off the golf course and brought the spare hole into the routing of the 18 holes. And that spare hole today is the 14th hole.
Right.
Which is on a nice piece of land, and it's worked out very well. The other thing, looking at the routing too, there was some restraints on what we could and couldn't do out there, and part of that was some of the existing blue gum high forest areas, and in particular the old 5th hole. It was tough for the good players, let alone for a lot of the shorter hitters who were on a par 4 uphill to a green the size of a set of tees. The following hole, the 6th hole, was blind off the tee, the fairway tilted from left down to right into trees, and if you're down on that right side, you had trees literally planted in the middle of the hole that completely blocked the shot to the green. So it was kind of not proper golf. Greens were small. The average green was like 370 square metres. They were POA, and because they were small, they were very uninteresting in terms of shape. It just didn't feel comfortable, it felt forced. So the opportunity was to say, well, let's get this right. So one night I had that sort of middle of the night sort of thinking, and the penny dropped, and I thought if we reverse hole 5 and hole 6, we could actually tee off from the current 5th green out to where the tees were, actually past the tees on the edge of the ravine to a potential green site in full sun.
Right.
You're only as good as your worst green. If we'd rebuilt that 5th green where it was, it would have been in shade, and the golf course still would have been an ordinary golf course based on that one bad green where you would never been able to go grass. So reversing that hole, put a green out on the edge of the ravine, out in full sun, with this fantastic district views of this bushland setting, and also the 6th hole, which I was talking about, that off-camber hole, by teeing off from behind where its green was and playing that hole in reverse, you're hitting into the slope. So you're hitting the slope, which was still tilting around to the left, but the worst part of it was off in the rough, and you had flat area fairway, and you had full visibility of the whole tee to green. And I didn't know, it's hard to know whether clubs are going to actually embrace these ideas. Sure. And I think that's one thing I'm very grateful. The club put full trust in me and the process. A lot of other clubs would have had, conniptions over reversing 2 holes on an existing, someone's had a course, all these sort of historical, cultural things, removing 1 hole and reversing 2 others. But that's what had to happen to make this golf course as best possible. Got 18 holes on the site that it is today. And as you see the course today, and you look at the new green sites and the holes, you kind of have that sense. Mackenzie called it design finality. You kind of have that sense that we've got this right. the greens are in the right place here, unless they ever move the clubhouse to the maintenance shed or something like that, move the club. Basically, everything's in the right spot to the sense that there's no reason or need or rationale to actually move anything or change anything in the future.
Yeah, okay. That's a great, and I suppose, analysis, and you've articulated that very well as to how you've come to those things, and a way that the club and people listening can see that when they go out there and look at the golf course. That's what I wanted to try and hope that we could pass that on. I wanted to sort of ask you, what does the new design offer to golfers? Because you mentioned how small the greens were. How have you changed those greens themselves? That was the essence of how this all started, right?
Yep.
I see some pretty awesome stuff out there, and it's coming from me, but you're the one who's designed that. I would like to hear from you what that is in a little bit more detail, what you gave the club.
Yep. Well, to be honest with you, it wasn't hard to make the greens better than what they had, right? They were power and they were small. When you've got small greens, you can't have much interest in shape. You can't have much interest in variable pin positions. So, day in, day out, the pin it moves around a little bit, but the strategy of the golf hole doesn't change. So by having the ability to get a range of green sizes, a range of green shapes and orientations, and a great variety was always important. And I think the better golf courses do have a range of green sizes and shapes and the way they sit in the ground and the land, and they fit and they feel. And I think all those things have been brought together here at Killara best we can. And I think having small greens, it's very uninteresting golf. And we want to make the golf interesting. We want to make it fun. We're going to make the way people think the way they're around the golf course. And what I mentioned was the ability to have larger greens, some long, some presented wide, some shallow front to back, some deeper. The ability to move the pin around. All of a sudden, the pin could be back right of a green behind a bunker, where you've got to approach that green from the left side of the fairway. If the pin's out at the front, you have the ability to approach it from the right side of the fairway. And so it was really thinking all that through with each of the holes, the strategy of each of the holes, and trying to make the golf course more strategic. And part of that making it more strategic, of course, was also making fairways wider and getting more light and sun and airflow into the golf course. So we've made a lot of holes wider by removing unnecessary trees that were planted, pine trees, a range of trees that had to come out, and we've got that width back, not as wide as I would like in some places, but a lot wider than before. And let the ground. See, the thing about Killara too, it's got very interesting ground. There's a lot of movement, and there's not a lot of bunkers. Out of the 18 holes, there's only 43 or 44 bunkers, and most of those are associated with greens complexes, not the fairway itself. There's only about 2 or 3 holes that have got drive bunkers on the fairway. But there's so much movement in the ground, you almost don't need fairway bunkers out there. So importantly is to have, strategy of golf hole starts at the green. And by having those range of greens meant the range of pin positions and a range of interests. So you're not just hitting the ball to the same spot on a green week in out, not necessarily playing to the same side or middle of a fairway. You've actually got to think your way around the course to get the most out of it.
Very interesting, mate. One of the parts and components, I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, is the particular grass types that have been used here. We'll talk about that. And also the sand. And I obviously, being a former superintendent, I love to know, and I would like you to try and articulate this to people listening for here that know Killara a little bit, for the members and anyone who visits in the future. You've got pure distinction bent grass on the greens. We've got zoysia, which is something that we don't hear a lot about so far in Australia, particularly on the green surrounds and approaches. I would like you to tell us a little bit about what that does for golf, and also the Yolonga sand that's used in the greens profiles here that was brought in, and how that has certain specific properties for golf.
Yep. When I was engaged, already the consulting agronomist John Nayland and Ryan Fury had been doing trials, which was actually a clever idea. I mean, there's a new irrigation system on the golf course, and so they picked some areas around the golf course to trial different turf types. And I think the trials in terms of warm season grasses for fairway and tees at the time was trialled in Santa Ana and in the Zoysias. And I think Ryan was, to his credit, was looking at the opportunities to provide, good all-round surfaces with the challenge of that Killara has. Like any of these heavily wooded courses, here in Sydney is shade and airflow. So they basically did a trial, a patch on the first fairway, and I think a patch on what was the old 13th tees, and one at a couple of other spots where they just trialled the different grass types and watched them for a couple of years. And that was a great idea because it gave course committee and the board the opportunity to watch those grasses perform. When I came along, I was looking at tiny greens surrounded by kikuyu grass with a sort of almost a 1-inch drop from the kikuyu down onto the putting surface. So there wasn't that short game shot making that is aspiring and makes the golf fun and interesting as well. It was just wedges around greens off soft, lush, taller kikuyu. And for me, and I guess my expectation is to get tight green surrounds as much as possible. And so Zoysia was pretty much in the mix, Zoysia Matrella. This particular cultivar called Zeon Zoysia was chosen to use on new tee work. So when we reversed holes, we had to do some new tees. And also it was chosen for green surrounds. And so all in all, 40,000 square metres of it was laid at solid turf around all the greens because I wanted that sort of shot making around a green where, you could bounce and approach the greens and run a ball up to the green from outside the surface. So about 20 metres out the front of the greens was when the Zoysia would start. And the intent's to mow that tight and let the ball bounce and roll, and not necessarily roll towards the pin. If you don't get in the right place in the way we've shaped some of the approaches to the greens, you might be deflected one way off to the left or off to the right, and roll away from the target. So the tightness and the choice of Zeon Zoysia in the green surrounds was really important because it brought a whole new dimension to the game of playing golf at Killara, which again is the fun and the interest, and for the better golfers, the challenge of, do I use a putter? Because a lot of greens you can putt off the side off here, or do I bump and run it, or do I use a wedge? And for some of the better golfers, that's the hardest shot decision to make around greens. So it's brought a whole new dynamic into the short game shot making around the greens. And of course, the greens themselves was pure distinction. Again, the grass has been trialled, and John Nayland had specified pure distinction at Royal Canberra, and he'd also specified it at Peninsula Kingswood in Melbourne. And it's a vigorous grass, and obviously the vigorous grass then sort of helped block out and made less opportunity for power to get into the greens.
Yeah,
so that was the reason for its choice. And to be honest, some of the best conditioned greens in Australia are Pure Distinction Greens at Victoria Golf Club in Melbourne, which are tight and firm and seriously smooth greens. So notwithstanding, it comes with a lot of work to keep them that way. But so Pure Distinction was chosen, and like Royal Canberra, I believe, John Nayland specified the Yolonga Sand, which comes out from Macquarie Gundagai, on a river there. The Yolonga Sand was specified, which is exactly the same situation at Royal Sydney, where it's a USGA type construction. So we've got a gravel base here of 10 centimetres and then approximately 30 centimetres of Yolonga Sand on top of that.
And the Yolonga Sand, it provides what my experience would suggest, and tell me otherwise, it can get quite a nice firm surface for golf. And you talked about that interaction in the surrounds with what the Zoysia brings to the game of the bounce and the roll and the run. That Yolonga Sand provides that in the green surfaces of how people can change the game, essentially.
Yeah, it's certainly a sand that, I can't remember the particle size distribution of the sand, but the characteristics of, for the layman, if you saw the sand on the pile up on a bit of concrete, you'd look at it and go, well, add some cement, I can make some bricky sand out of it. That's what it looked like. And when it dried off, it formed a bit of a crust, which is kind of a sign there's enough fines in there to if you control the moisture levels in the green well enough, you can get a fairly firm top surface. And that's important, obviously, to achieve any new green, is to achieve that firmness. And while I mentioned firmness is a important discussion these days, and I think it's something that Sydney golf is probably, and hopefully Killara will too. Sydney golf is typically a lot of softer greens compared with Melbourne, and I think all the tools are in the shed these days to provide fast greens, which shouldn't be the measure, because as I said, the easy thing to do is create fast greens, whether it's 11 or 12 or 13. When the course was built and finished at Killara, I sort of saw green speeds between 10 and 11 in that sort of area, and that's where they should stay. But importantly, more important than green speed for me, is the factors of trueness of roll, which we're going to get with any new green, of course, too, and firmness. One of the balls to bounce, just like in Melbourne Sandbelt, where firmness of a green and bounce of the ball is important, and it's part of the defence of the green too, not soft, spongy greens. So for me, coming from Melbourne originally and sort of growing up around Melbourne Sandbelt was wanting to get that firmness of surface, more important than speed.
In your opinion, mate, I suppose I'm probably looking for how does the new golf course design set up Killara Golf Club for the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think there's some design finality in many ways with the greens where they are and the holes where they are. There's some new tees that got built. But I guess like any golf course, and this goes through the top golf courses in the country, is there's always room to make the golf course better and not to rest on your laurels. I mean, it was a big investment by Killara to do that project. And the thing is, can the golf course still be better than what it is? Of course it can. And the club's developed a master plan of course improvements with myself and Ryan and the previous course committee. And it's important that the mentality is and the psyche of the club is we always want to make the golf course better. So there's things identified out there, such as some tee reconstruction of some holes out there, are ways of making the golf course better in the future. So that's important, not to rest on your laurels and keep delivering something new in a measured way as, funds and resources and time and appetite allows. And there's no rush to do these things necessarily, but bearing in mind that if there's someone said, how can you make Killara better? Well, it's written out in this course improvements master plan. So it can be better. Yep. I think it's pretty good for what it is. Can it be made better? Yes, it always can be better. Can Royal Melbourne West Course be better than what it is? Yes, it can be better. Royal Melbourne, it's not touching the architecture, it's basically just managing vegetation. But here at Killara, there's some vegetation to be managed, there's some tee work to be done, there's some mowing line, there's a few things out there that can make the golf course better.
Very good, mate. And look, one final word from you, Harley, as the golf course architect. Can we have one final word on what you've got? What can you leave the playing members of Killara Golf Club with, and maybe any visiting golfers about the golf course itself?
That's a hard question. Of course, get out there, play it, and enjoy it for what it is, and which it is. It's a special place in Sydney golf. It's a club with great history, which of course we're celebrating this year, and I guess part of the journey that the club's had with its golf course over the years, being an old historic club like this, is always putting the golf course first, shall we say? And I think get out and enjoy it. You're here to play golf. You can't play golf in the clubhouse, so go out and enjoy the golf course.
Love it. Fantastic. Harley Kruse from Kruse Golf, thank you so much for being involved in talking about the history of Killara Golf Club. Now, it's tough keeping up with the Joneses, as I often put it, in the golf club world, in a world where everyone wants to judge courses against each other. Regardless of your thoughts on top 100 golf course lists, they exist. And for the most part, for interest and conversation, probably will for a long time in the future. That said, in 2022, after all the work completed by the club executing Harley Kruse's design and vision for the golf course, along with that and the direction from the golf club as we've heard from Rod, Killara Golf Club re-established its position back into the Australian Golf Digest Top 100, coming in at number 85 after a long 18-year hiatus. Then earlier this year it rose further, coming in at number 73. That's a sensational result and shows just what the revamp of the golf course, the redesign and all the work that Killara has done here. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the 125-year story of Killara Golf Club. It's a big story and one that's been worth sharing, in my opinion. Killara Golf Club is a club that, in its earliest days, was the beginning of, the first of, or the oldest of many things, as you've heard. The first golf course to be built on the north side of Sydney Harbour, the first golf course to own its own land, the beginning of Eric Apperley's golf career, has some of the oldest golf trophies still in existence in Australia, and as far as we know, the longest inter-club competition in the world, that of Killara v Newcastle in the Rankin Cup. And more recently, it's the first golf course in New South Wales to use Pure Distinction across all their greens and the first to use Zoysia on all their surrounds and approaches on their greens. At the start of this project, I had a number of questions I wanted to answer, and during this project, we did just that. We found out just who and how the Lindfield Golf Club was formed, discovered just how deep the club's relationship is with the Royal Sydney Golf Club and why it was the first golf club on the north side of Sydney Harbour. We discovered who laid out the first iteration of the Killara Golf Course and many of the alterations thereafter, along with the previously unknown thoughts, very special thoughts and information of Dr. Alistair McKenzie during his visit to the course in 1926. I think you'll agree that Killara Golf Club is a close-knit family of families, of people that have created an extended family home full of fun and enjoyment. And when needed, everyone digs deep to help support each other, the local community, and even the country in times when it's needed. A club where young people are welcomed and nurtured, where the older people find friendship and fun, and where men and women walk on the same level, supporting each other and fostering the essence of what it means to be a part of Killara Golf Club. Whichever way you look at it, Killara Golf Club is one of the best places to play golf, much like it was when it started 125 years ago. And with the club's vision, it will continue long into the future to be the extended family home of the Upper North Shore residents that so enjoy spending time there and inviting others to join them in any form of recreation and socialising. I'll leave you with this. As we look to the next 125 years of Killara Golf Club, we can consider James George Edwards' choice in the name of Killara. Always there, permanent. Well, there it is, ladies and gentlemen, the full history of Killara Golf Club. That's the conclusion of Aussie Golf History Killara Golf Club, and I hope you guys enjoyed every minute of it as much as I did, and all the hours and weeks and months of research that went into to putting all of that story together. It was absolutely sensational. I really hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and I hope the members of the golf club get to take quite a few things out of that as well. And hopefully you members out there get a better understanding of your own golf club, and those that don't know Killara Golf Club and where it sits in the world of golf, in the Sydney circles of golf and its treasure as an Australian golf club and one of the oldest in the country, you've just got more of an understanding of just where it sits and how it began and how it's come to be to where it is today. It's fantastic. Absolutely, it's an absolutely sensational golf club. Don't forget to check out Killara Golf Club's website, kgc.com.au, and there's plenty of information you can find there, whether you're a member or not. You can go on there and have a look at the history tab on their website and just see lots of different bits and pieces. And there's a wonderful timeline on there that they have now available for people to look at, and it's got so much on it, basically everything and then some of what we've talked about on this podcast episode. And just so that you know, a lot of the information that's come for this podcast has come through the two history books that are from Killara Golf Club. One was from the 60s and one was a centenary book as well from 1999. And there's plenty of information that come from this podcast from those. A lot of stuff, as you heard during the podcast, come from a number of different newspaper articles, which was the endless amounts of time spent researching. So that's why we talked about them, and that's why I mentioned them as we were going through the podcast episode. That's where plenty of the information has come from. Now, a number of people I have to thank for helping me put all of this podcast together. It's been a long road and a great deal of work. And I have to start off with Karen Wood and Lorraine Gray, both from Killara Golf Club. Karen Wood, obviously, as you've heard in the podcast episode there, is the Vice President of Killara Golf Club, instrumental in helping get this project together. And of course, Lorraine Gray, who was a key part of the podcast in the story in bringing that to you, but also in the background being a long-time member, a life member, the archivist and historian currently at the golf club there at Killara. And Lorraine Gray was just a wealth of knowledge and information, and so I'm grateful to both Karen and Lorraine for all the work that we did putting that together, and that they helped me putting all of that together. So much work in the background getting this going. I have to thank the Killara Golf Club board and management and the staff of the club that looked after me during all the time spent at the club over the last few months putting all this together. A lot of time spent there, a lot of support from them in working on this project and getting this going and putting it out there for everyone to listen to. So I must thank the golf club as a whole, and a couple of smaller notes to some of the staff that did help me in the club. That's Anne at the reception. She was fantastic taking photos and making sure I was comfortable and everything inside the clubhouse when I was working there, researching researching and also during the recording process. And also to Sue Gross, who helps Lorraine with some of the history stuff as well. She works down there in the archives area, and for her work on the online history timeline of the golf club, which was a good resource that I utilised as well. Now, I have to thank Gary Danvers from New Zealand. Now, Gary is a Danvers descendant and a distant relative of Charles Danvers, who was the first president of Killara Golf Club. I have to thank him for his information and getting me to some areas and giving me a lot of the background knowledge of the Culworth details of the Culworth name, the manor back in Culworth in England, and lots of details around that. So we shared a great deal of information, getting some of this knowledge around about the Culworth Shield. So thank you to Gary Danvers, and also to Tracy Fiertel, who is from Historical Connections on the North Shore of Sydney. That's her business. She does a lot of historical research, and Gary put me on to Tracy, and she was most helpful in a lot of the details in the background of Charles Danvers, that she's done a lot of research for the Danvers family. So I have to thank Tracy as well for a great deal of help in getting some information, nearly all the information about Charles Danvers between the two of them, which was sensational. Next thanks is to Ted Euther, who's the grandson of Alan Hamill Euther, the man who brought the spawn of the idea of the Lindfield Golf Club and ultimately Killara Golf Club. That's where it all began there through the research that we've conducted. So I have to thank Ted. I have to thank his wife Judy and their son Nick, and they gave me a great deal of time from a completely left field random email that I sent that ultimately got to them, and then they helped me organise a time with both Ted and Judy to catch up one morning for a morning tea at their house. And I sat down with Ted and Judy, and we went through a great deal of the family history there about Alan and a lot of his golf. He's got a great lot of history in Sydney golf in itself. It's quite extensive, but I really do appreciate it. Without them, I would never have got any of this knowledge. We would never have found any of this information about Alan Hamill, and it pointed me in the right direction. So there was, my hat's off to them so much, Ted and Judy and Nick, about the Alan Hamill Euther part of this story. In the earliest days, which was vital and some of the most important information. So I have to thank them immensely so. The podcast guests that you've heard and listened to, I must thank Louise Lane, Greg Honan, the professional there at the club, Karen Wood, obviously, as I mentioned before, Rod Reed, life member of the golf club and former president, and also to Harley Cruz, architect from Cruz Golf, a golf course architect. Harley's someone that I've got to know as well over the years, and he was fantastic to be able to join us and give us a great deal of time there to record on site. And all those people were able to join us on site and record on site, which was fantastic on the one day that we packed it all in to record the entire podcast there in one big go. So thank you so much to all the guests that were involved in this project. I have to give thanks also to Hugh Jolly, who's the historian of the Royal Sydney Golf Club, and with whom I had quite a long conversation with about a lot of the details and the earliest people, and we talked about Alan Euther and Leonard Dobbin and some of the earliest parts to Royal Sydney Golf Club, which is where a lot of the story began, and in the connections between Killara Golf Club and Royal Sydney Golf Club, or as it was in the earliest days, Lindfield Golf Club. So I have to thank Hugh Jolly for a great deal of information that we had during a couple of conversations there, which pointed me in the right direction. I got lots of information out of Hugh. Thank you also to Jimmy Ballard, who's a former assistant pro at Killara Golf Club, and he'd worked with David Mercer. Jim's actually doing a bit of work, and I got to know Jim a little bit from Blackheath Golf Club, and he's up that way now in the Blue Mountains, and he does a little bit of work there helping out and around the place at Blackheath Golf Club. He's a fantastic individual, Jimmy, and I have to say thank you to Jimmy as well. And finally, to my wife, Bree, I've got to be honest, I had so many late nights. We had a lot going on with the kids and the interrupted days and what seemed like endless research, where I'm saying to Bree all the time, babe, can you look after the kids? I'm down this rabbit hole and I've got to keep going and I need to finish this part off. There were so many times that we did that. So I have to thank Bree, because she allowed me to, on all of the occasions, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the mornings, in the middle of the days when I just had to go down and get some of this information sorted. I was on tracks, and she certainly looked after the other side of the house when I was down rabbit holes and putting things together, and the late nights of doing stuff when the kids are crooks. So I'm so thankful to Bree for the background support in being able to put all the time and effort into this and stitching everything up and doing all the research, because there are hours upon hours upon hours upon hours, I kid you not, of research that went into putting all this together, and that's why it's been such a great story to be able to tell. That's a big thank you and a wrap up, and I hope I haven't missed anyone. If I have, I do apologise, because there's so many people that have been supportive along the way in helping putting this project together, and I should make mention it's in conjunction with Killara Golf Club. This has been a paid project with Killara Golf Club to bring out their story, and it's been wonderful to be able to work with the club so closely to be able to get so much of this information back into light, back into their archives that they didn't know they'd lost in the fire. So we've done an incredible amount of work together, and I thank everyone involved in helping me do this. I'm just the voice putting the story out there, and all of these people have been a key part to be able to bring this story out to you. Now, if you are from a golf club that would love to have their history brought out in a new and fresh way to a wider audience, and maybe you would like some unknown historical questions answered, and you can get in touch with me and let's talk about how I might be able to help you and your club. If you're a board member, if you're a member, if you think you've got a golf club that's got a wonderful story to tell, maybe we can do some work together and bring out another story just like this one. And don't be shy. If you don't need to be a big golf club, one of the stalwarts from the earliest parts of golf in Australia. You might just have bits and pieces that you might not be aware of, or you just know that your club's got a cracker story to be able to tell. And there's so many of them around this wonderful country of ours in Australia that have fantastic stories that people don't even know. The general golfing public don't even know exist. So I didn't know this about Killara, for one, and it's not far from where I live. So there's plenty of reasons to bring out a history story about your golf club or something else you might know of in the golf industry, but I'm happy to have a chat with you and see what we may be able to do to work together. But if you're from a golf club specifically, you've seen what we've been able to do here with the Killara Golf Club story, and if you want to, get in touch with me, thegolfinggreenkeeper@gmail.com, or DM me on social media and get in touch with me that way. But there's plenty of ways to do so, and they're happy to work with other golf clubs and bring out their story as well. Now, don't forget, next week I'm bringing something very, very special to you. Now, thanks to John Deere, and with John Deere Golf Keeper of the Greens, I've been on the road recently. As you know, I've travelled to Melbourne, and this time, it is true, the trip was to go down, and I was able to have a chat with the one and only Richard Forsyth, Director of Courses. I'm going straight into the Royal Melbourne Golf Club, where I sat down with Richard and was able to record an episode for John Deere Golf Keeper of the Greens. So you are really going to want to listen to this conversation. If you don't know about the inner workings of Royal Melbourne Golf Club and about Richard Forsyth and how he works and how he leads the team down there, his background into greenkeeping, we go through so much. This is a wonderful conversation that I was able to go down on site in his office and record with Richard. It's absolutely sensational. You are going to want to hear it. Doesn't matter what part of the golf industry you are, what corner you're hiding in the world of golf. Talking about Royal Melbourne and talking to Richard Forsyth about his career, this is sensational. So a big thanks to John Deere for helping me get on the road and get down there to chat with Richard. You're going to want to listen to it. So make sure you've clicked the subscribe button of the Golfing Greenkeeper podcast to stay up to date to when all these new episodes are going to be coming out as we move along. You know, I've got plenty coming out, lots of content, and I want you to be part of it and get an inside scoop and a lot of inside knowledge to this part of the golf industry, which lots of people don't get to see very often, and that's what I'm able to bring to you. So make sure you click the subscribe button. Make sure you share this around. Let people know about it within your clubs, within your workplace, your friends that you play golf with. I don't care who they are. Let them know, because coming soon is one you are not going to want to miss. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening to Aussie Golf History, Killara Golf Club. So glad to be able to bring it to you. Thanks to everyone involved in helping me share it along the way. I'll always leave you with it. You hit 'em clean, we'll keep 'em green, and I'll catch up with you next week.